Good evening from Cairo, Egypt. Your Excellency, the Ambassador of Brazil, Antonio de Aguirre Patriota, our guest speaker, Julián Fuks, our interviewer, Dr. Rasha Samir, our valued viewers. I'm Amal Mahmoud, Managing Director of Diwan Bookstores in Egypt. We are honored to welcome you to the fifth event in the series of Latin American Literature Week in Diwan in collaboration with the Latin American embassies in Egypt. Our guest speaker today, who is joining us for the first time on Diwan page, the Brazilian author Julián Fuks. Fuks is the author of numerous books and a winner of a number of literary prizes, along with being chosen in 2012 as one of Granta magazine's best of young Brazilian novelists. Today, he's joining us in an interview on his 2015 award-winning novel, Resistance, which was translated into English by Daniel Hahn and into Arabic under the title Al-Muqawama. Resistance won numerous awards: the Djibouti Award for Book of the Year 2016, the Oceanos Prize 2016, the Jose Saramago Literary Prize 2017, and the Anna Sagers Prize 2018. Also, we welcome our interviewer tonight, the prominent Egyptian novelist, writer, journalist, and dentist, Dr. Rasha Samir. Being the author of 10 published books, Rasha Samir is also a best-selling novelist in Egypt who writes a weekly column in the Egyptian newspaper Al-Fajr. Before we begin, we welcome the Honorable Ambassador of Brazil to give his word.
Good evening, and thank you for allowing me to say a few words. I'd like to start by thanking Diwan and Amal, Leila, Nada, Rasha for the excellent partnership with the Latin American embassies in Cairo in the organization of this first Latin American Literature Week. Let me also thank Ambassador Eduardo Varela of Argentina, who has actually taken the leading role in this initiative. We are very grateful. We believe this will greatly enhance our cultural ties. It's maybe a first initiative leading to other closer and more diverse initiatives in the future. Let me welcome Julián Fuks, who is one of the most prominent contemporary Brazilian authors. I was very happy to meet him last year here in Cairo when he came to promote his award-winning book, Resistance. I'm sorry we cannot meet again in person, but perhaps once the pandemic allows, he will make another trip and come back. Julián Fuks has worked in many different media. He has now become a very popular writer for the newspaper Folha de São Paulo, reaching a wide audience in Brazil. He also writes for the UOL on themes that range from love in the times of COVID-19 to the current political events in our country. Julián's novel Resistance has won many prizes, as Amal was mentioning before. It's been translated into several languages, including Arabic. And I believe that he is very suitable for this Latin American week because he is himself the product of, two Latin American countries. His parents are originally from Argentina. They migrated to Brazil during the military dictatorship in search of better livelihood. He has now created his own roots in Brazil, and his novel Resistance taps into this experience, and especially on the relationship with his brother, who was adopted, and with whom he develops, I think, a rather complex relationship that I won't describe the novel. Maybe we will hear more about it during the interview. Differently from some other Brazilian authors known internationally, such as Jorge Amado, I think he is quite well known in Egypt, and whose style is maybe closer to the so-called magical realism and is infused with regional exuberance. I believe Julián Fuks represents a more urban, less tropical, perhaps more introspective literature. His generation draws inspiration from the country's recent past, but I think mostly tries to reflect our rapidly changing present, the hopes, the anxieties, the disappointments, in all its complexity. Julián writes with great sensitivity and intelligence. His latest book, the novel Occupation, I'm not sure if this is a translation into English, where the same character who was present in Resistance comes back, and the collection of essays, Romance, are some of the more recent published works by this rather prolific author, considering his age. And of course, I am looking forward to hearing more about him tonight. Thank you for this opportunity and congratulations to the organizers. Shukran.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency. And now I leave it to Rasha and Julián to start the interview. And if there's any question at the end, I will be giving it to both of you.
Good afternoon. I'm really flattered and glad that that you are my guest tonight. On behalf of all Egyptian writers and of all Egyptian audience and readers, I would like to welcome Mr. Julián Fuks. I will just try to pronounce it as the ambassador said it, but I will say Julián Fuks. And to the Egyptian writers and readers and the media. I really want to thank the Brazilian ambassador, His Excellency Antonio Patriota. On behalf of the famous bookstore, Diwan Bookstore, I had a little introduction, but actually it seems that they all introduced you. So I don't have anything more to say, except that I was really flattered and I really enjoyed your book. It's great. I got the Arabic translation first, and then I decided to read it in English. I love the English translation. So to begin, first of all, Mr. Julián, I would like to ask you, how and when did you decide to become a writer? Was it a dream that came true, or was it just a change of fate?
So good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank you the invitation, to thank all the organizers of this event. Certainly a beautiful event. I've been able to follow some of it from here, and it's something very nice to see that Latin American literature is able to cross the ocean, to cross a desert, to get there finally in some very different and very as well affinite place. And so to me it's a pleasure to be here and to be talking to you. I'd like to thank also Antonio Patriota for his presentation, very flattering one, talking about the space we are able to achieve here in Brazil. So it's something very nice to hear too. So answering your question, getting to the point finally, I believe at some point in my life when I was maybe a teenager, I felt I should write. It was something that came, the sense of a necessity, the sense of a responsibility came before any pleasure in writing, I believe. I think at first I felt this sort of imperative. I had to write, I had to become a writer, and I didn't know why. It was something that was there. It was something that became more important to write and to be, to communicate something through writing was something that became more important than doing well in a math test or something like that. So I had this decision that was that happened before any experience in writing, and then I decided to go for it and start writing, but not knowing what to write. And that became another problem. The first problem, maybe the most persistent one, the one that I still have to face every time. So what should I write about? What should we write about? What deserves to be written? That was the main question, and the one that I'm still trying to answer.
But you didn't study literature. Your study, I mean, your grade is not literature. You didn't graduate from.
Not at first. I decided to study journalism, and that was with the idea of becoming a writer. That's something that I don't know how it's in Egypt, but here in Brazil, we hear a lot, if you want to be a writer, don't study literature, or you will spoil your vision or something like that.
We do the same here.
Yes, it's a mistake. I learned it was a mistake. So I studied journalism. At first, I was very enthusiastic with journalism, and it's still part of me in many ways. But then, at some point, when I finished the graduation in journalism, I saw that it was very much of my interest to study literature. So I did my master's degree in Latin American literature, studying an Argentinian writer, and it was also a form of getting in touch with my possible country, since my parents came from there, and I wasn't born there, but most of my family lives there. So I have a complex relationship with the country, and studying Argentinian literature was a way of being in touch with it too. And then I decided to go on and to do my PhD in literary theory, studying the novel. So in a way, I became also a literary critic, and it's part of me. I write as a literary critic, and I do my criticism as a writer. It's something that became only one thing. I'm not divided in between journalism and literature and fiction and literary theory. It's part of the way I see the world and the way I can write.
But since you do both, you do journalism and you do writing as a literature, which word do you think it's more profound? The word that's written in a novel reaches people easier, or that one written in newspaper? Which is more profound and more effective in your opinion? That aims to change.
I think the easy answer would be to say that literature is more profound, but it would be a mistake. I think it would be a mistake because it's very different ways of dealing with things, with dealing with reality, with dealing with the present as well. And I don't see literature as the only place we can deepen our thoughts and really get to our most profound feelings and ideas. I think it's possible to do that also in journalism and in any other form of communication of art. So it's not something that I would embrace, this idea that I needed to be in literature. But I do feel at some point in my life and also in the country's life, in Brazilian life too, I at some point tend to look more for literature and to dedicate myself more to writing fiction and to writing books larger than the text I write for the newspaper. And then in some other moments, there are some phases that apparently need our participation in a more direct way. And I started to do that in the newspaper and also in the books. So my recent novels, The Occupation especially, is something that deals a lot with the present in Brazil and the situation we have in the country right now. So it's possible to relate with this very different visions in the different languages, I believe.
Okay, as far as I know, the main periods of Latin American literature are the pre-Columbian, colonial, resistance, modernismo, boom, and contemporary. As far as I know, each period has a genre that ruled, ranging from first-person narratives, magical realism, philosophical short stories, anti-establishments, poetry, and experimental prose. So how can you categorize your writing? In which category falls the writing of the talented Julián Fuks? And which period, in your opinion, is the period that introduced the Latin American literature to the world in an accurate phrase?
Well, definitely the Latin American literature was introduced to the entire world with the magical realism. This is something that we all know. It's very clear. It was a moment, well, studying the history of the novel, as I did in my PhD. I realized, and it's easy to see that it was a moment when European novel got into a cul-de-sac, didn't know where to go. It was started to flirt with silence, wasn't able to recreate itself in a vibrant way after the works of James Joyce and Virginia Woolf and Samuel Beckett. So it was a moment where the novel didn't know where to go as a genre. And then what happened is, in this exact moment here in Latin America, there were many writers novelists writing very vivid literature with this exuberance that we have in the continent, and a sort of exuberance in stories that they could tell many times, that apparently mixed in this civilization, this complex civilization that we had here. So there was something that was very well received throughout the world. At some point, these writers were telling stories that were very compelling to the European writers and to the Asian writers and to African writers and readers, sorry, not writers, readers, every time readers. So it was something that changed a lot, changed greatly the reception that a Brazilian writer or a Latin American writer could get in the world. But then this wasn't enough to tell who we are. We started to have some sort of movements that denied the previous one. So not Macondo, but Macondo, criticizing what Garcia Marquez was able to do, and the way he presented Colombia. They started to think that maybe there was more of our countries to show, and some other form of writing that could be also loyal to what we are, to our identity or whatever. So there was this shift, this change, and I'm in a way I respond to this change too. I don't write in any way similar to magical realism. I don't see, I'm not in touch with the sort of reality that created magical realism. I'm much more attached to realism, or trying to get rid of it and to write something else. And this something else is also denying not only magical, but also realism, and trying to get in touch with reality itself. Not realism, a way of reproducing or trying to represent reality, but a way of trying to deal directly with what we have in the real world. So convoking or how do we say that? Trying to grasp reality and put it inside the work in a very different way. And I've been writing autofictional novels that have my life as a source, or my family's life, and trying to relate with the history of my country or my countries, Argentina and Brazil, the way that these personal lives were touched by the political story of the countries. So it's something that to answer finally your question, where I find myself is in a hybrid place where autobiography and fiction and essayism and historiographic novel mix and get to something different from what we have had before.
This is exactly what I felt reading the novel. I felt like you don't want to be caged in a certain definition, the magical realism. No, you had your own style, and you want to escape from this tiny thing. So from in between the lines of the novel, I saw resistance, of course. I saw a young dreamer searching for his own identity. So may I ask you, in your opinion, what's the difference between nationality and identity?
Yeah, that's a good question. Sure. What I realized while writing about it, it was, for some novels I had a sense that I was looking for an identity or looking for my origins, and when I thought that I had it, that I had written about it, it wasn't over yet. It was still to visit again and again, and I made those visits to Argentina, to Buenos Aires, trying to look for what I could have been or to what my family is. And it has something, it has always something of an instability, of an impossibility to define. It's something that I realized that identity is not rigid. It's not something strict. It's something that is always changing, and that we never end having it in our hands. So maybe nationality is even a more rigid idea of what we are. We are supposed to be something once we decide we are Brazilian or Argentinian or Latin American. It apparently we have a model, and we could, if we want, follow some of the characteristics of this model. So being a Brazilian guy, I should be maybe merrier, maybe I should smile more, I should dance or make music or something, some other cliche, whatever. So it's something that when you live in a country, in any country, you realize people aren't what they are supposed to be because they simply were born there or exist there. Of course, there's always some influence and some characteristics that are there in a way that we could see in the majority of people or something. But it's always something a lot more unstable that we don't tend to understand. It's something that we look for indefinitely, and we'll still look for it once our ideas of nationality are done.
Okay, let's see. In the middle of the 19th century, a rise in the literature that fought against the colonizing force and cherished the national culture took place. Resistance literature was important because it aimed to define what the identity of a Latin American person looked like, both on an individual and national level. So the resistance literature movement is closely correlated to the Modernismo period. How do you relate this sentence to your novel, or the fact of your novel?
Yeah, the title of the novel has, it's a bit provocative because it apparently when you get a book with the title Resistance, you think immediately you read some sort of literature, with this resistant literature, or you read a novel about resistance against the military regime, against the dictatorship.
Exactly.
It's something that immediately comes to our minds. And it's curious that in many other countries, in many other languages, the word resistance relates to some specific fact or some specific moment in the history of the country. So when it was published in Italy, it was impossible to name the book Resistenza, because it became something else. It talked about another time and another movement. Or in France, it was impossible to name it La Résistance, because it would be the French resistance against the the German forces in the World War II. So this word has always many strong implications. And it was provocative to name the book this and to talk about something else, because resistance against the military regime was part of it. Of course, I'm talking about my parents being persecuted by the military regime, having to flee Argentina to go to Brazil, this sort of militancy that they had. So there is this resistance there, but I'm also talking about another kind of resistance, the one that we see more negatively, the one that we see as a way of denying things or not approaching things. So the brother in the book resists being part of this family, being adopted entirely by this family. So he resists accepting fully the family. And the narrator as well resists telling this story because it's a very intimate and a very compelling one for him. So he wants to tell the story, but he also backs up and tries not to get too deep in it, and has this conflict. So the idea was maybe through psychoanalysis in a way, the concept of resistance there. The idea was maybe to get this more negative sense of resistance and trying to convert it to the most positive sense of resistance as an act of force, as an act of strength. And maybe literature could be the bridge that unites these two meanings.
This novel, along the reading, it's really one of the most lyrical, deep, pondering books I've ever read. It's challenging, digging in the dark history of Latin America. I've been thinking all the time when I'm reading. I said, what was the spark that made this guy say, okay, I'm going to start writing this novel now? So what was the spark?
I was before writing a collection of political short stories. I didn't know what to write about, as I said before, and I was hoping to find an issue that deserved the time that we dedicate when you write, the great time that it takes. So I was writing this short stories, these political short stories. And in the middle of these political short stories, I decided to write a short story about my brother. And it was kind of a change on the project itself, because at first it wasn't political. So I was talking about my relationship with my brother, and there was adoption. So in a way I thought, well, maybe adoption is a political issue. We should look to it in a way that questions what happens, what complexities happens when we have an adopted family, an adopted son, an adopted brother in my case. So I started writing this short story that was supposed to be quite short, but then there were the circumstances of this adoption. So my brother was adopted in 1976 in Argentina, and it's a very sensitive moment because there was the military regime, and after a while, after my brother was adopted, for some years there was this accusation of having more than 500 babies kidnapped by the regime that were given to adoption. So maybe it was an informal adoption, and maybe this was the case of my brother. So it was impossible to understand it in all its extension. And it still is. It's impossible to get to the end of it. We'll never know exactly what was the condition of his biological family to give the baby up. So it was something that complicated the story I had to tell. And I saw, while writing this very short story, I saw that I couldn't write about it without telling my parents' story and without telling our family story of exile, the adaptation to Brazil. And then I was present again in another way, asking myself if the son of exile parents is also an exile. So it's something that became also this questioning of my own identity and my own origins, as you saw. Maybe this was the spark. This writing about my brother, because my brother was a complex relationship I had. It was something that moved a lot of my feelings and my thoughts. It was something very compelling to me before writing. So it was that was mainly the reason I decided to write this book.
Why did you decide to write your biography, not in a you didn't put it in a sort of a biography, a true or a real biography? You just put it in a novel, or maybe it was hidden under the pages of a novel. Why didn't you write a direct biography like the one written by Gabriel Garcia Marquez that was called Living to Tell the Tale, his autobiography? Why didn't you just do it this way, or just you wanted to do it as a fictional biography?
At first, it's not exactly a biography. It in a way it seems to be, and it's inspired in my own experience in every point of it. I was moved to write it in a very sincere way. It was sincerity what drove me to write it. So it's something that, of course, could be understood as autobiographical, but that wasn't the sense of the writing itself. I wouldn't look to my life and think, well, I've lived enough, I should write my own autobiography. It would have no point. It would be.
You're still young. You're still young, so you can do this now.
Yes, I'm young and I haven't lived anything important. I'm not Garcia Marquez in the end of his life, trying to see everything that he had lived. So it's a very different impulse that made me write this book. I'm part of a greater movement. I'm not alone in this this position of writing about my own life. I was relating to what is called in many parts of the world autofiction. So writing in a fictional way about our own experiences, creating a different pact with the reader that reads that thinking at some point, well, this is a novel, this is fiction, and then at other parts feeling, well, no, I believe he's writing about him and about his life and about his brother. His brother may exist, he definitely exists. So it's something that this reception of the book changes the way people read, and many times it becomes something more intense, right? Reading this kind of books is a different kind of I don't know what's the word. I lost the word I wanted to say, but it's an intense experience to believe literally what you're reading, and maybe not believing everything, but starting to feel it's not exactly like that, and starting to question yourself as a reader. It's a very different experience that we don't have, and it wouldn't be the case with an actual autobiography.
So I asked myself many times during reading, how did your parents, your family, your sister, your adopted brother, how did they receive this book? Were they happy? Were they angry? I think you explained this at the end of the book, but I need to hear it from you.
Yes, well, it wasn't simple to write this kind of book because it entered in a very intimate experience. I talked a lot about the things that we are living, how adoption became a sort of a taboo in our life. in our lives, in our family, the way that we weren't able to address this issue in the best way, in the best possible way. So it was something that became a sort of a silence inside our family, and I had to break it with the book. I believe this was part of the impulse. I had to say the word that we weren't able to say. So I start the book with the sentence that was forbidden to us at some point. My brother is adopted, but I don't want to say that my brother is adopted. So it wasn't simple for them to receive this book. I talked to my brother before. Actually, he had a few years earlier asked me to write about adoption in a moment that was very intense for us, in a family therapy that we were making, where in a moment that he recognized a lot of his own conflicts, he came to me and said, "This is what you should write about adoption. People don't know how it is." And then at that point, it wasn't something that I would take seriously. I wasn't thinking about literature when we were making this family therapy, so it wasn't something that I decided to do instantly. But a few years later, I thought of it and decided that I should write, as I told before. Then I went to my brother and said, "Well, remember that you asked me to write about adoption," and he said no. No.
So he denies now.
No, he said no. Now I think he believes what I say, but
it was a weak moment.
And I said, "Okay, but I'm going to write about it." "Okay, do whatever you want." So I wrote. And at some point, apparently, he wasn't connected to it. He wasn't interested. But in other moments, I saw that he was very much interested in it. He told his friends that I was writing about him. So it was something, an important part of his life while I was writing it. And later as well, he didn't read the book. He decided not to read the book. It has more than 5 years now. It was published in 2015. So he decided not to read it. But at this point, he knows a lot what's there because people talk to him about the book, and he decided that it contains his life. And when he wants to tell someone what happened in his life, he gives the book. So he gives the book to his friends or to people he meets.
And dedicated to them instead of you.
Yes, possibly he could do that. I'm not sure if he did, but he could. When he was going to get married, his future wife didn't know he was adopted. And the book was about to be published in this exact moment, and he decided that the book should tell her.
And that's nice.
So it was okay. The story is there. She reads the way she wants, and that's it. That's enough for him. As for my brother, my parents is a different story because they were much of a part of it. I interviewed them on their stories before writing the stories, and then after writing, I sent them some chapters, and they read them, and it was also very intense, this experience. I wasn't writing the official biography of the family. It wasn't something that should be authorized by them. So in many moments they said, "No, it wasn't like that. This is wrong, or this is imprecise, or I don't recognize myself in this character." But what I decided to do is to incorporate this criticism to the book itself and not changing it. It wasn't, the idea wasn't to get an official statement on our family. It was to tell a story in a multiplicity of voices and multiplicity of ideas and visions. So I wanted to incorporate this vision they had on the book itself in the last chapters, and I don't know, when the book was finished, they were preoccupied. They are psychoanalysts, and they thought that their patients would read the novel, and they did read the novel. So it was kind of a problem for them, but it wasn't. It was supposed to be a problem. It could have been a problem, but everything happened naturally. They started to accept the book as it was, and to accept what readers were able to grasp with the book, and it was, now they are very happy with it and with all that happened with the book itself.
So the book is not only a tale of exile, political activism, or adoption, family relationships. I think it is a message to your parents, justification to your brother, and a revolution that was meant to stand in the face of dictator rulers. Do you agree with me in that?
Yes, I think I was conscious about that the entire time I was writing it. Yes, I saw that I was writing to my brother and to my parents, to my sister as well, but also to any other reader. So it was every word there was double, was meant to be read by this part of the family, and was meant to be read by any other reader. So it was a very delicate book to write, because I had to balance these two preoccupations.
A criticism written about the book said, first, someone said about the book, first he's failing to write about his brother, then he's failing to write to his brother, now he's failing because he's writing without his brother. I didn't get the sentence, but what do you get it, or to what extent do you think it's true?
The book talks a lot about failure. It's something that it's there. The way that we tried to write the story as it was, the history as it was, and we are never able to apprehend it. It's something that it's never in any possible way inside our hands. It's something that we lose. Memory in its imprecision, and speech and its imprecision get to trouble any message that we have to say about the past. So everything that I wanted to tell, I was unable to tell in a way, and started telling something else. And when I talked a lot about my brother and saying a lot my brother in the book, while writing it, I felt that every time I wrote, I was farther away from my brother, because the brother that exists in the real world is very different from the one that the word evokes. So it's something that it's a lapse, it's a distance that it's impossible to cross. This is the paradox of representation. When you say a word, the object disappears, and what you have in front of you is the word itself, and not anything else. So I realized writing that I was telling the story of my parents, and I was telling my brother's story, but I was also not telling their story. I was failing in telling their story, and this failure is an integral part of the project itself. It's part of its thoughts. It's part of the ideas that I had to move to write this book. So I decided I had to embrace failure, and this is a sentence that could be almost offensive to the book itself. It's not. It's part of its intention.
Well, actually, I didn't want to say it clear because I didn't want to be offensive, but
no.
It relates to the book.
Yeah, it relates a lot.
So all the time we knew that Sebastian is the younger brother. Why did you hide the name, or you didn't decide a certain name for a nameless brother, adopted brother? What did you mean by this? And was it meant to be?
It's a very intimate speech about family. So when I'm telling the story to a friend, drinking coffee and saying, well, actually my brother was adopted, I would never say his name, not because I would hide the name, but because of the language that we use when we are having this sort of conversation. It was supposed to be this almost a confession. So when I say that, well, here, for example, in any point I felt I should name my brother or name my father or name my mother, I wouldn't begin to say, well, Mario, my father. So it's something that would be artificial in the book itself, or would hurt the effect I was trying to produce. The effect I wanted to produce was this very intimate one, the effect of a confession, of a very sincere and honest voice. That was what I wanted to use. And also myself, the narrator, or Sebastian, wasn't named until the end of the book, when the father reads the book and says, well, but you did what you had to do, Sebastian. And that was a moment where it would be, it's this, what I meant before with the balance, with the pact of this auto-fictional pact. You don't want people to believe entirely what you're writing, and you don't want them to doubt it entirely. So you want to find a balance. And with the name Sebastian, I said it was a declaration to the reader that this was also made up in many senses. This was also a fiction, and it's not me exactly the one that's telling this story. It's Sebastian, an alter ego.
I think this was really very clever, because it gave a space for the imagination of the reader to just let imagination go. So I think this was very clever. You decided to write about the Argentines dictatorship and its aftermath. Was this a meant message to the world to change the dirty stories of Argentinians' war, or the stories of the Argentinians' dirty war, as they were told by the English-speaking world? So dramatic, so profuse, so sometimes extreme. Was this a trial to shed light on the real picture, that the fairy one was not found? Was it a scream to tell the truth? And how do you remember as a child this period of exile and darkness? Tell me about that.
I think it wasn't, the idea wasn't to make a correction, so people aren't reading the Argentinian history as I wanted them to read, so I'll give them my version of it. It wasn't that the idea. I believe the very harsh consequences of this regime are quite understood throughout the world, so people know how dark it was. I believe that. I think it's something quite clear. There are some facts that are important to know, that people, I think, when they get in touch with it, with the history, they do understand. So there were 30,000 people that disappeared. There were this many tortured militants, or people in general, not only militants specifically, and this 500 kidnapped babies. There are these numbers, but there are also the lives. There are also many other kinds of consequences. So my idea was that there's this core of suffering that any dictatorship creates, and there are also other concentric circles of pain and of effects and consequences that are hard as well, but they are not, they don't become exactly news. So telling my parents' story wasn't telling the most dramatic one. They were militants, they were persecuted, they had a serious, they were almost, let's say, killed by the regime. One night they were called and say, you should leave the country right now or you'll be the next ones. So they left that night and came to Brazil. So it's something that is very dramatic, but doesn't compare with losing your life or losing your family in the dictatorship. So it's a different kind of pain. And they came to Brazil, and you asked me about this exile here in Brazil, and it was pretty much a lot different from what we tend to read about in novels about exile or in essays about exile, because exile is always described as something dark and lonely and problematic in many ways. People are suffering a lot because they can't be in touch with their country, and all this is true. All this was present there, at a certain degree, but in many other ways they were happy here in Brazil. They found themselves here in Brazil. They were able to begin their lives again. They had another opportunity after being in danger for so long, and after being scared for so long, frightened of every corner in their lives. Now they were able to feel a lot more free. So it was something that was very important to them, and they created a community of Argentinian psychoanalysts here in São Paulo that became their family. It was something very, it was a liberation for them. So I had to be honest about that too. I wasn't supposed to write, if I would follow what people write about exile, it would be a sadder thing. I would write something gloomier. But here I was able to write about a very different experience and what Brazil represented to them after they came.
Okay, so this is the Arabic literature translation for the book, and I read it actually in English, which is translated. This one, it's translated
why
by
did you decide to read it in English? And not
because I know a lot about Daniel Ham. I know he's a consistently excellent translator, so I decided to write it to read it in his own words. I know he would make a parallel translation that is good as the story is, and that's what I wanted to ask you about. I read it, by the way, in both. I read it first in Arabic, and then I went and read it in English again, but I like really the English translation. I wanted to tell you, did you search for the translation? Did you know at first that this book would be translated? I'm going to translate it to Arabic to English so many other people can read it, or was it just luck? And do you supervise this translation, or you don't?
Well, I didn't know what would happen with the book. It was impossible to predict something like that. It was like little things that happened that made the book go farther and farther away. So the literary prizes, the prize in Portugal, then in Germany, one thing becomes the other, apparently. So it wasn't something that I could predict. But I followed it, of course, and when I could, I read the translations. Yes, with Daniel Han, he sent me the first draft he does, and he always does like that. He translated other books I wrote and other texts too. So he translates he makes a first draft, and then he sends to me, and pointing out the troubles, the problems, where he found that he didn't have the exact word to translate. And then I explained to him what I thought. He speaks very well Portuguese, so we can talk about it in Portuguese or in English. It's possible to go from one language to the other, and it's always a very, at the same time, is a pleasurable activity, but also kind of painful. You see the text becoming something else, and it's not exactly what you wrote. It's clearly that something very different. And I write in Portuguese very preoccupied with form, with sonority, with rhythm. It's something that I write reading it out loud to me, and trying to deciding that this sentence is not good enough, even when it does say what I wanted to say, but I need to find a better word or a better rhythm or something else. It's always something that it's kind of an obsession to find the best way of saying something. And in a translation, you don't see that. Even when you have a great translator as Daniel Khan, it's always something else. It's another man's vision on what you wrote. So it's kind of it's painful to see the text itself in other language. Even when I was the translator, because the Argentinian version I translated myself to Spanish. And it was painful too. It will be always painful unless I don't know anything of what's there. I don't understand the word, and then it's perfect. And then it's only pleasure. When you have this kind of thing, the book I don't have an idea of what's inside, and this is beautiful. I love it.
But don't worry, what's inside is good. I assure you.
Okay.
Well, actually, as a writer, I do believe that the script loses its heart when it becomes translated. It's a very important thing, so it can go all around the world, but the heart of the script is lost during translation. I do believe just like you. So there are two or more master scenes in the book that's really provocative and very passionate. And one of them is very strange, but it really stopped me when you were talking about the awkward moment in 1978 while watching a football match between Argentina and Peru, the game that eliminated Brazil from the tournament with their Brazilian friends and their own split loyalties to their countries. Love for one country, hatred for the regime, and the tournament succeeded in promoting that. I guess you lived that moment. You should have lived these moments, right? It's not fiction.
No, I wasn't born yet at that point. It was 1978, and I was born in 81. So I didn't live.
No, I'm not that exact moment, but I mean the story. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I heard the story many times. My parents telling this story, but not with all these details, and that's one thing that fiction is always there. Usually I hear these stories in a very brief way. My parents aren't much. They don't tell the stories with a density of details. They tell the story in 2 or 3 sentences. So well, Argentina, we were watching the game with Brazilian friends, and everyone was indignant with the situation, and that was it. And I had to ask more and more and more. And then my brother screaming, cheering for Argentina, that was kind of showing that they were very critical of the regime, but when it comes to football, to soccer,
yeah,
it becomes something else. The nationalism gets to you, and it's something that maybe you can't control as much as you want. So the story was there, but I wanted to tell it. I needed to tell it when you start telling it, you have to find the exact words to tell them, to tell it, and it becomes inevitably something else. So it's fiction, but it happened.
Okay. So one of the most touching, amazing scenes, in my opinion, also is the scene expressing the ceremony that was held by the grandparents when they were looking for their grandchildren after they've been lost for a long time. Maybe those kids are now old men and old women, but grandmothers never stop searching. That's what you said. This was really very touching. You live this moment, huh? Now. You're not old for that. Tell me about this scene. I love it. It was really written in a very profound way. It's a master scene. And tell me something about that scene from behind the scenes.
Okay. Yeah. So, no, I wasn't there. Yeah, this
again. Okay.
Again. I lived this moment that was a great moment in Argentinian history, even though it's something that doesn't have much to do with the destiny of the country, but it was a very important moment when this grandson was found, and he was, well, it was a very symbolic of the way that Argentina was able to cope with its own history, the way that they could review their history and find some peace and find some justice. So it was a very important moment in Argentinian history. I was there with the grandmothers of Plaza de Mayo a few years earlier, many times with them in the square or in their building, trying to know their stories, trying to read what they wrote. This was something that always was very touching for me, this story. So I knew a lot about them, but I wasn't in Argentina when they found this grandson. I was here in Brazil and trying to deal with it, with everything that was happening through the internet, watching the videos and trying to follow it. And then I found that in a way, I wanted to be part of it. I wasn't part of it. I was excluded from Argentinian history. I wasn't able to be born there. I didn't have this right. I was expelled my future was expelled with my parents, but partly I wanted to be present. So then I wrote about this feeling, this sentiment that I needed to understand in myself, and it was pretty much related with my brother and everything that we thought could be present in his life. This, I think, is what motivated the scene that you're mentioning.
I read in an interview that you wanted to name the book The Possible Brother, and your publisher suggested that it would be named Resistance. So to what extent do you allow your publisher to suggest, to edit, to say his opinion in your work?
Normally, I don't allow much. When I can, I say no.
When you can, okay.
but the thing is that when I can, because with the title, I was satisfied with The Possible Brother. It talked a lot about what the adoption part of the book. It's the idea of the possible son that in psychoanalysis comes as an interpretation of the part of the adopted son, in opposition to the ideal son that never exists anywhere. So it's something that I wanted to have in the book itself, the idea of a possible brother that was also ambiguous. Who's the possible brother of whom? So I could be the possible brother of my brother, or my brother could be my possible brother. And this is there. This part of the book is still there. There are many sentences where I talk about this in a subtle or direct way, maybe subtle. But then the thing is, a few months before I published my book, there was this great Brazilian writer called Chico Buarque, Brazilian song maker as well. So he's very famous, and his book was an important book called The German Brother. So the possible brother sounded like a sort of
same
a pastiche, or maybe a same thing, or maybe I was similar. I don't know. Maybe making a parody of his book, The Possible Brother, not The German Brother. They weren't, and it was the same publishing house. They didn't want to publish so close to the other book, another book with a similar title. And they made a list of possible titles. I rejected all of them except Resistance. Resistance, I wasn't convinced at first, but then I thought more and more and thought that maybe there was something important there, and maybe it resonated with what we had in the book. So I took the book back. So okay, I accept, we'll change the title, but then I have to make some changes in the book. And I rewrote parts of it so that the word resistance could have this kind of ambiguous sense too.
So coming to the publishing house, Charco Press is a prestigious publishing house focusing on finding outstanding contemporary Latin American literature and bringing them to new readers and shed light on them in the English-speaking world. So did you search for the publishing house, or did they find you? Did you want to translate your books, or was it just the approach of the publishing house to you?
This was my first book published in this big publishing house here in Brazil called Companhia das Letras. And then they liked a lot the book, and from the beginning there was this agent, this Laurence LALW, who's a French-British agent, literary agent, and she started working my book in other places, other countries, and after a while it was published in many places. So it wasn't me, I didn't go for it after it, and they didn't approach me directly. Now they do. Now we have a good conversation with Charco Press, and they are incredible. I love them. But at first it was part of my agent's work.
So now, lately, the revolution that happened in translation allowed us, as maybe in the Arabic world, as part of the world, read for Latin writers. Some became really famous in the Arabic world, like Gabriel Garcia Marquez, Paulo Coelho, Pablo Neruda, Isabella Allende. So I might be pronouncing the names wrong, by the way. So as a reader, I would like to know who do you read for, or who's your favorite novelist? And as a writer, I would like to know who's your idol, or who's your role model.
I don't think I have a role model. Maybe I would skip this part of the question. Okay. I think it's something that it doesn't make much sense, because new times demand new writing. So new times demand another new form of writing. So it's impossible to model our writing in what people did before. It's something that it's impossible to follow. If you try to write again, this is Borges wrote a short story, Pierre Menard, author of Don Quixote, which is I don't know how it's translated in English or in Arabic. this short story, Pierre Menard, that tells the story that if you try to write again exactly the same words, so this guy, Pierre Menard, rewrites the Quixote 2 centuries afterwards, and looking for the exact words, and this book becomes something very different from the original one, even though it's exactly the same. So it's something that thinking of influences in literature, it's like that. If you try to do again what someone did before, it becomes something else that could be interesting, but probably it's not. Probably it told what was supposed to tell, and now it's not. It's impossible to repeat. But I do appreciate a lot many writers. I read a lot my contemporaries, and I read classics too. So I think writing is made of what you read. And just to mention one person, because I don't want to be too generic, but I read a lot Sebald, the German writer, and he's part of this hybrid movement in which the novel is close to the essay, and it's close to philosophy and with political speech. And with J.M. Coetzee, you find also this kind of preoccupations. And here in Latin America, there are many writers doing that. And many writers writing, mixing fiction with essay, with a political view of the world. And it's something that it's very potent when you read it in literature. I think it's, well, you read yesterday or the day before Lina Meruane in the event, and what she does, I think it's great. What she did in her works that mix fiction with essayism is very powerful, and I see in this ways the future of literature, or maybe its present.
Have you ever read any translated Arabic novels, or for any Arabic writer?
Well, after going to Egypt, I read Naguib Mahfouz, and I hadn't read before, and it was, well, incredible, very good. I wouldn't comment to you about that.
Of course, but he's our great writer.
Yes, he's a great writer.
He has a different school of writing, yeah, of course.
And I translate too, and I translated not a, he didn't write in Arabic, but an Arabic writer that writes in English, was Hisham Matar.
This guy is just magnificent. I love his books.
I translated him to Portuguese, and it was the Anatomy of a Disappearance is his novel that I translated, and it is very good, very good. I love it.
Yes. So I think time flew by, and I've been talking a lot. I know that you probably have headache by now. So I have only one last question. How does it feel winning all those prizes for this novel? And what is more rewarding for Julián Fuks? Getting a prize, getting a great feedback from readers, or changing the path in lives for those who read your book?
I think this last question has a correct answer. I should answer alternative C. Definitely. I know this is the correct answer. But of course, I think what surprised me the most when I published Resistance was that there was much response by the readers. And nowadays that they can write to you and find you in Facebook and tell their stories on reading your book. This was something very, very, very different for me. It was very different from anything I had before. My previous books, my previous novels were had gained some recognitions with prizes and awards, and with that being shortlisted here and there, but it wasn't. They didn't have many readers. So this time, what happened that was very different in my life was there were plenty of readers writing to me and saying what they felt, how they felt reading this part and this scene, and this was very very important, and it changed me a lot, because I used to think about literature as a solitary endeavor, as something that you do in loneliness and alone with your own thoughts. And now I believe literature is a great dialogue between people, among people from everywhere, trying to find what we need to write about, trying to be the most expressive they can, trying to be the most honest they can. So it's something that, well, I started valuing a lot more this kind of meeting, this kind of event, when we can discuss literature and talk about anything in a very deep and honest way. And it's something that I now realize. The myth of the lonely writer is something that, to me, is finished. And I want to do this other kind of literature that is in touch and in dialogue with many other people.
Mr. Julián Fuks, it has been really a pleasure and honor to be interviewing you today. I'm looking forward to have you as our guest in Cairo. And thank you, Your Excellency, for following us. Thank you, Amal. Thank you, Diwan Bookstores. I certainly recommend this book to Arabic readers. It's different. It's a profound book. Thank you. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation to have you tonight. Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency.
Thank you, Rasha, for a wonderful interview. And thank you, Julián, for this great talk and answers. And actually, what we're getting is all comments on how much people are who are watching and viewing. They're enjoying every bit of it. So thank you very much for this amazing talk. And in the end of this talk, we thank the Ambassador of Brazil, our guest Brazilian author Julián Fuks, and the Egyptian writer Rasha Samir, and our viewers for joining us in the 5th events of the Latin American Week. Thank you all very much and for joining us, and stay tuned for tomorrow. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.